I'm going to start off this review right away by stating a certain fact about this show. On Netflix, the show is currently counted as having 78 episodes, and Wikipedia also counted this show as having 78 episodes too. But this leads to a very confusing rabbit hole, as the fandom wiki is very unfinished, as all the remaining episodes are not even listed on the episode guide, but they instead have separate pages on the wiki. I don't know if it's because nobody knew about the remaining 26 episodes because of the fact that they're on Netflix, or if it's because of the fact that this show is unknown about. I don't know, but to be honest, this particular discussion on the list of episodes being unfinished is much more interesting than the show itself. Yeah, as you could tell, I don't have a lot that I could really say about Power Players. Something that I should bring up about the show before getting into the review is that this was the last cartoon that I started to marathon before I moved. However, I got to 3 episodes before I decided to put watching the rest of this show on the back burner, as there were shows that were much more interesting to talk about, and Thundercats Roar and Ollie's Pack were shows that I wanted to get off my chest, as I've been wanting to talk about those two for over a year. Watching the rest of this show didn't cross my mind until November, and I decided to get back to watching this show. And I can see exactly why I wanted to get other projects done and left this one hanging. This show has such little substance. I'd even say that out of all the shows that I've reviewed so far for Sean's Network Reviews, this one has the least amount of substance out of all of them, even less than the other show that I said had very little substance, Camp Coral. So, what is this show about? This show revolves around a kid by the name of Axel. One day he falls into a situation where he accidentally brings some toys to life and was given power bands to be able to turn into an action figure himself. And for the rest of the series, at least with the exception of the finale, Axel needs to make sure that his power bands don't fall into the hands of his enemy, Madcap. And he's joined by his friend Zoe and some new toys of his that are alive because of Minergy. The former of whom is the only one who knows that these toys are alive, while the latter of whom defend Axel off whenever he or his home is attacked by one of Madcap's minions, and they need to make sure that their identities are a secret. It's pretty much Chalk Zone, except without any of the musical numbers at the end of the episode, the charming chalk-like animation, and the chalk world is replaced with toys. Although, it is subtle. I myself only noticed this because the setups feel very similar. To be entirely fair with this show, unlike with say Robot Boy and Ollie's Pack, I actually don't mind this show being an episodic villain of the week type of show, since this show's setup sounds very simple and there's not much to do about this show's concept to go into character growth or arcs. That's why this show didn't fully delve into the backstory about the other toys until the series finale. However, my reactions to this show are kind of similar to what I thought about the Clutter episodes of Eek the Cat. This show just doesn't do anything that interesting with itself. And in the process, alongside with the fact that this show has very bland and generic storylines and characters, I found myself being extremely bored. I can't say that this show is the worst thing ever. The show is just in the middle and it's relatively harmless, but it's the one show that I had the least amount of stuff to talk about so far, and it's one that I literally had to push myself to finish, no matter how unmotivated I was to watch it, because I just wanted to get this one out of the way, as it's a show that I just don't have any interest in watching ever again. Now, that doesn't mean that I didn't have anything to say. In terms of the good stuff, they would usually come in near the end of the series, and for the stuff that I didn't like in this series, there is a whole host of problems ahead. And let's start off with one of the bigger problems with this series, the animation. I made this very clear in some other reviews of mine, that I'm not a fan of 3D television animation, and I'm still not. Oftentimes, they end up either looking unfinished because of the tight budget, the rendering ends up making the show look plastic, or they would have a frame rate issue where the show would feel very choppy. and this show falls into the latter category. While Power Players doesn't have the worst 3D television animation that I've ever seen, at the very least, the textures look nice when the show's animation quality isn't fluctuating, and most of the animation problems result from the tight budget rather than the animation itself, which is more than you can say for other 3D television animated shows of its kind, like Taken the Power of Juju and the Monsters vs. Aliens TV show. However, that is definitely not saying much. In terms of the animation on display here, something just doesn't feel right. And then as I kept on watching the show, it hit me what I think is wrong with the animation in this show. You know how in my Tom and Jerry comedy show review, when I pointed out that the show still tried to do slapstick in spite of its 1980s television budget, so the animation ended up being a mess? Well, that's a similar problem that this show has, but minus the actual unfinished frames that the Tom and Jerry comedy show has. In other words, my problem with this show's animation is that it tries to bite off a lot more than it can chew. The show's animation put a lot of work into one of the many essentials that makes an animated series look finished, that being that the textures look very nice, especially on Barbarian. But every other aspect of the animation on this one is heavily glanced over. This show, fun fact, is created by Jeremy Zag, who also worked on Miraculous Ladybug, and yeah, it really shows. Miraculous Ladybug is a show that, from some of the episodes that I watched, I think is pretty decent. However, the animation of the show, regardless of what people think about the series itself, is the weakest aspect of it. Particularly the mouths on the characters, and whenever that show puts on big expressions. One episode of that show got the reanimated treatment where each frame is actually drawn in 2D, and I'm glad about that because the animation in the actual 3D series ended up being more distracting than not. But the animation in the other aspects of that show were fine, particularly the action sequences, textures, and the movements of the characters in motion. This show feels as if you would take Miraculous Ladybug's animation and slice the budget in half, thus making the animation even worse. Yeah, the mouths are better and the facial expressions are more subtle, but every other aspect of this show is so much worse, and as a result, the frame rate and background meshing with the characters really suffer in the process. I honestly believe that the animation in this show would have benefited much better if it either cut back on the detailed textures or just resorted to being done in 2D animation instead. Yeah, it would have meant that the show's animation would have looked more simple and a little less detailed, but sometimes having less is better, and this show is a prime example of that. Because the textures in this show are a lot more detailed than most other 3D cartoons, that meant that the frame rate and motion had to be sacrificed, when the movements are one of the most important aspects of a show like this. And the characters also more often than not have this good dinosaur problem where the characters poorly mesh with the backgrounds. The character designs themselves don't look bad, and the backgrounds are nicely detailed and realistic, but the characters that live in these backgrounds end up looking like cardboard cutouts that don't belong in this universe. And it also has this Camp Coral problem, where the show goes from having decent looking textures to looking very plastic. It's understandable for this aspect to be on the toys, since as I just stated, they are toys, but sometimes this aspect can even be applied to the humans, and other times, the lighting looks very off, which once again, makes the characters look like they are cardboard cutouts that don't belong in this world. I also really hate the camera in this show. In fact, this aspect alone is enough for me to say that this show has the worst 3D animation out of all the shows that I reviewed so far. Not the worst animation out of all the shows that I've yet to or have reviewed. Shows like the Tom and Jerry comedy show, Kuku Harajuku, and Thundercats Roar takes those spots, but Power Players is definitely up there. Even Camp Coral, for how horrifying its faces were, doesn't have a problem with its camera. Yeah, there were problems where I jumped because of how off guard I was because of their expressions, but it never got to a point where it was unintentionally going to give you a headache. That's exactly what Power Players does. Even when it's for a simple discussion or conversation, the show feels the need to spin its camera around as if you're on a roller coaster. But this isn't supposed to be a 4D ride. This is supposed to be a cartoon show to watch for entertainment value. Having the camera shake around all the time is going to cause some headaches depending on the type of person you are. I understand that Power Players is an action show and you can't just have the camera constantly standing stiff while a character is fighting, and I'm not expecting this show to be as stiff with the camera as Rhapsody Street Kids, or as stiff with the action as Kung Fu Dino Posse. However, even during the non-action sequences, the camera can get out of control. And once you've seen how action shows actually are, this excuse is immediately blown out of the water. Something like the original Teen Titans and Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 2012 are able to use their cameras effectively, and they would only have the cameras go crazy whenever there would be an action scene, or if something grand was being revealed, and were still able to keep the viewers entertained too, because of the character dynamics and comedy. But if those two examples were too serious and from too long ago, here are some examples from action shows that are fairly recent, and more on the episodic comedy side. Something like OKKO Let's Be Heroes, Rise of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, and Mao Mao Heroes of Pure Heart also leaned somewhat on the comedic side of action shows, but they knew when enough is enough and had the camera stay still when they didn't do an action sequence. And how about those episode plots? There's an episode where a certain character has a guilty pleasure that they like to do, but they don't want to admit it. There are 2 episodes where a character is jealous of another toy that comes along and thinks that the said toy is going to replace them, but they turn out to be the villain in the end. An episode about a character going way too far with their pranks, so the others pretend he's invisible. Character feeling like he's unappreciated, so he leaves and goes somewhere else. An episode about a character playing unfair, so they need to learn to play by the rules. I could just go on and on and on. Normally, I don't mind whenever cartoons use plot lines that have been done before, as long as the show subverts it to where the show is enjoyable that these aspects can be forgiven. A show like Teacher's Pet was able to do this, as the show was so absurd and fun that I didn't mind that these plotlines have been done before. Same thing applies to Rocko's Modern Life and OKKO Let's Be Heroes. The storylines and episode plots of those shows sound mundane and boring, but they did a lot with the materials that they were given to make those shows fun and enjoyable. Power Players just doesn't really do all that much with what they were given. So in the process, alongside the fact that most of the plots in this show have been done before in a variety of other shows, and the fact that like Clutter and Ollie's Pack, this show doesn't do anything exciting or interesting in its episodes, I found myself being very, very bored. To a point where while I was watching a certain episode, I would just not continue watching any more episodes on that day and just resume the next day, and feel so unmotivated to continue because I was so uninterested in what was going on, and all I was thinking was, why should I continue with this show when there are so many interesting things I could be doing right now, like working on my artwork or watching something that actually interests me? And you'd think that this show would be much more interesting to watch, considering the fact that this show has the concept of a 9-year-old kid being able to shrink down to the size of a toy and fight off a spider-like toy, and hang out with other living toys. Oh, well, there's the action sequences. That should be able to make up for how dull this show is. And admittedly, yeah, the action is a blast to watch, but then again, Robot Boy and Thundercats Roar also have awesome action sequences, and I don't like those shows either. Similarly to Robot Boy, the actions shown in this show don't really make up for the quality of this show, as everything leading up to these action sequences are so bland and boring that I just zone out during those scenes. There are some times where the show occasionally gives out something interesting, although for the very wrong reasons, such as my least favorite episode, Bowling for Ballers, because the very exhausting camera is out of control, and Axel is strangely out of character as he's very ignorant towards the fact that Zoe is having anxiety about this bowling match, and jumping in front of Zoe, which could have gotten her seriously hurt. but sometimes can be for the right reasons, as some episodes do show potential that the show unfortunately didn't take advantage of, like Operation Midnight, which takes the concept of a mission to receive something and has a lot of fun with it, has a ton of stakes, and a satisfying ending where this toy thief gets exactly what he deserves. But all of these episodes appear near the end of the series, and in the US on Cartoon Network, the show's run was cut at 52 episodes, and the last 26 was released on Netflix. But whenever the show was just focused on Axel and the other toys, if the episode didn't have Madcap or one of the other villains appear, well, to quote Seinfeld, it would be a show about nothing. Not helping is that the characters in this show, for the most part, are on the exact same level of non-interesting as the rest of the series. The main character, Axel, has zero personality whatsoever. Besides the fact that Axel likes to play video games and is the one who is put in charge of these power bands, what personality does he even have? Well, in the two-parter first episode, Axel goes from playing video games a lot to playing with these toys that his uncle gave him. But I don't know if you haven't noticed this, but that's not a personality change, that's a hobby change. At every other point, Axel himself just comes off as the everyman, the type of character that you would see yourself in, rather than a character that has an actual personality. Basically a Doug Funny and Arnold. Axel is not nearly as uninteresting as Tommy from Robot Boy, and to the show's credit, it doesn't launch said character that we're supposed to relate to into traumatizing situations unlike Robot Boy, and Axel is at least not hateable, and he does realize whenever he messes up for the most part, and it doesn't take his friend's scolding to make him realize his mistakes, unlike Ollie Allen from Ollie's Pack. But still, Axel is a very uninteresting character. Same thing goes to Zoe. I'm pretty sure she was only added to give Axel some help with keeping the secret between them, which once again sends me Chalk Zone vibes. Axel's toy friends are also one-dimensional archetypes that I also don't have much to say about, with the exception of two of them. Barbarian is the barbarian-like tough guy who has a soft side. Moscow is the wrestler that is kind-hearted and really likes goulash. Sarge Charge is the army-like leader that gives out the plans. Slowbot is the slow genius. And Bobbie, Blobby, and Galileo are two of the worst characters in this show, which is a shame too, as Bobbie Blobby has the best design of the series, as I do like the simple expressions that she puts on, which do look cute, and her robot suit does look pretty cool. However, after you have your character get needlessly aggressive over someone just trying to help you get your suit clean, especially when you have that character become just extra weight on the team afterwards, that's when you're far from being able to recover. If it wasn't for Bowling for Ballers, Bobbie Not Blobby would be my least favorite episode of the show, because Bobbie Blobby acts incredibly ungrateful and aggressive towards Moscow, who is just trying to help her clean her suit. But the episode for some reason wants you to see Moscow in the wrong, and frames him as doing something wrong. Yeah, he should have asked for Bobbie Blobby's permission to clean the suit, but he was doing something legitimately nice for her, and from the looks on what he was doing a pretty good job on cleaning the suit. Bobbie Blobby is very lucky to have someone who is willing to help her, but she's ungrateful throughout the episode, even in the end of said episode. And oh my goodness, the fact that the other side wants us to feel sorry for Bobbie Blobby after how she acts at the beginning of the episode is downright insulting. At the beginning of that episode, she annoys Sarge Charge, she makes Barbarian miserable by spoiling the entire book that he was reading, and was being negative towards Axel, and she decides that she wants to go to the villain side because the others were just trying to tell her to stop being so negative all the time. Let me make this clear, that she was the one who started to annoy the others in the first place. The others didn't come over to her and start telling her to be happy when she was just minding her own business. No. She started annoying the others, not the other way around. And after this episode, she never had another episode dedicated to her ever again. Maybe a body/personality swap episode, but she never got another episode dedicated to her again. And that is a pretty big shame because she had a chance to be fleshed out. showing that she can have a soft side to her, but no. She just decided to blend in with the other main characters after this episode, leaving her off on a note where, yeah, she's a very negative character that is needlessly aggressive towards those around her, even if what they did was unintentional. Sure, she does have some moments that do show that she can have a soft side, as shown in the episode Operation Midnight, where she calms down Axel after he has a panic attack about Toy Thief. But that one moment is heavily overshadowed by tons of moments where she is needlessly aggressive. I'm not even kidding when I say that at the beginning of the episode, Attack of the Thermotron 9000, she mercilessly attacks Galileo, who is equally as awful for reasons I'll get to shortly, because Galileo kept changing the thermostat, as she's more concerned with her clay melting than the fact that Galileo was freezing to death. According to Wikipedia, this episode is the 3rd episode of the series, even though on Netflix it's labeled as the 19th episode. Imagine this being the 3rd episode you watched. This makes for a really sour introduction for her. While I won't say that Blobby is the worst character out of every character in each show I reviewed so far, she's definitely one of the worst female characters in the show I reviewed so far, being up there with music from Kuku Harajuku and Chitara from Thundercats Roar. Galileo is not much better. In fact, I think he's just as bad, if not worse, than Blobby. Blobby does have potential to be redeemed. She just didn't have another episode dedicated to her after the other side. Galileo, on the other hand, has several episodes dedicated to him, and he does not improve a single bit. What is my problem with Galileo? He is super annoying and incredibly untrustworthy. He didn't start off too bad. At the beginning of the series, he started off as the type of character that is obsessed with selfies, and he talks in a way that can be considered as overacting. And to be fair, during these moments where he's tolerable, Blobby was more of a problem than him. Then we had an episode called Swing Set Jet Set, where Galileo steals Barbarian's hammer without him knowing, and trades it with Princess Sugar Salt to get a jetpack. And the only reason why he decides to get Barbarian's hammer back for him was because his jetpack breaks. Not because the other characters were mad at him, and not because he realized that trading weapons with one of the villains of the series was a bad idea. No, it's because of a broken jetpack. And the show seriously wanted me to side with him when he gets accused of stealing Masco's belt and the thing in the wall, but it does a very hard job at convincing me to give any sympathy for him, as he's constantly acting smug when Axel is just trying to help him. And he was even planning on taking Masco's belt for himself when he and Axel find it. And he didn't even learn his lesson at the end. And the fact that he was willing to spill the secret that he was a living toy to the entire news, revealing the other toy's secret in the process, just because he wanted to quote Shakespeare on the news and green with envy, is just anger-inducing. One other episode of his that actually made me angry when I first saw it was in Scratch My Back, where Barbarian is put into a situation where he needs to scratch the back of his arm. Galileo literally says that it wouldn't have happened if he focused on him, and is only focused on what he was doing with Masco and Sarge Charge, instead of caring about the fact that his friend is feeling miserable. And you know, for an episode that tries to teach a lesson about paying attention to what's in front of you, it does a horrible job at it, especially because of the fact that Galileo is more concerned about the meditation that he's doing with Sarge Charge and Masco than his friend having an itching sensation. The villains are also nothing to write home about. I do like Dr. Nautilus, though, as he's played by Richard Horvitz, who also voiced Daggett from Angry Beavers and Zim from Invader Zim, so you just know that he's going to be entertaining. And Rufus, aka the Toy Thief, is a nice change of pace from the toy villains that we have, and it really adds a lot of tension to some episodes. The other villains are nothing special, though. Madcap is one of those standard Saturday morning cartoon villains that treats their henchmen as objects. He's basically someone like Tobey from Puka and Lord Boxman from OKK Let's Be Heroes, except without any wit and memorability. Princess Sugar Salt is pretty much the same. She's basically a less memorable version of Ring Ring from Puka. And others like Porky Punk, Orangutan, and Dynamo are just there. They don't have any personalities whatsoever, they just exist to serve Madcap and nothing else. I like the idea of Surge Charge, how he wants revenge after being knocked to and trapped in a box multiple times. But firstly, his episodes appear near the end of the series, particularly in the episodes that didn't air on Cartoon Network. And second, man is his voice acting terrible. Most of the time, it sounds like the voice actor is way too far away from the microphone, so most of his lines sound very echoed. I didn't notice this until his second episode, and when I did notice it in his second appearance, I couldn't unnotice it. Though, the worst villain in this show is Ice Crusher. Why is that? He's literally nothing but a Canadian stereotype. You know the types of things that Canadians get stereotyped as? Playing ice hockey and saying the word A multiple times? That's literally his only character, and his only evil plan he does in every episode that he appears in involves playing a game of hockey, and that's literally it. And in every single piece of dialogue that he speaks, he constantly says the word A, making him a very obnoxious stereotype in the process. And thus, whenever I listen to him in each piece of dialogue of his, and he says A, I become more and more irritated. Like, way to generalize an entire country of people, show. But, other than what I stated in this review, you can do a whole lot worse. There's just nothing to really say about the show. It's the most 5 out of 10 show that I can think of. I think that if this show was a mini-series instead, kind of like, say, Over the Garden Wall or Long Live the Royals, maybe this show could have fully explored its characters and not feel the need to stretch everything out to a point where it gets boring, or maybe the show would have focused more on its characters and all of that if the show's episodes were 22 minutes, though that is a common problem with shows on Cartoon Network nowadays. Even shows that I like OKKO and Mau Mau have this issue, then maybe this show would have been something worthwhile. That is, if Cartoon Network put more faith in this show. As looking through Cartoon Network's scheduling history, I found that the show would air in the mornings, meaning that Cartoon Network only wanted this show so that way they could air filler content for the morning time slots. Typical Cartoon Network. For how this show is now, I definitely take this show over something like Camp Coral, but I do find this show weaker than the Clutter episodes in Eek the Cat and Making Fiends. Though to this show's credit, I will say that the series finale is pretty good, though the ending is pretty rushed. Basically, it's the same problem that a lot of people had with the Steven Universe Future finale, except it's even more of a letdown, because Madcap being this huge of a threat was a huge build-up in parts 1 and 2, and the stakes were huge, only for the climax for him to be defeated very easily, but a very satisfying finale nonetheless. If I could give a few recommendations for this series, I'd say give a few episodes a watch and see if you like it. This show does have a large amount of mixed reception for the few people that have watched this show and feel pretty divided. But that is for the people that have heard about and watched this show. Much like NightmareNet and Ollie's Pack, some friends around me that I've talked to haven't even heard about this show. I only know about this show because of the fact that I scrolled through the list of Cartoon Network programs and catching a few of the episodes on Boomerang. And much like the Tom and Jerry comedy show, I became interested in doing a review on this show from there. Although, if you want to see this show done right, I'd say watch the Toy Story and Lego movies instead of this show, because unlike Power Players, they actually do something interesting with the materials that they were given. They're entertaining, and do have substance beyond their concepts. While not the worst thing ever, Power Players is a show that I don't have any interest in watching again, and this is a show that I'm probably going to end up forgetting about in the next couple of months. And the only way that I remember about this one is ranking this show alongside the other shows I'm reviewing and looking back at this review. What show is it talking about again? Power Players? I've never heard of that show before, and that's probably for the best.